A time comes in the life of every race when people are driven by echoes of the past to chart a course for an exalted future. Africa is at this threshold, as major actors in the Africa arena plot a renaissance towards common destiny. Let's pedal across the streams of yesterday, through the back streets of Africa to the defining roles of policymakers, the political realities of the African nation, balance of power, and the strive to sustain national interest and identity. Join us on Network Africa on Channels Television. Network Africa, the rallying point for the emergence of a new Africa.
On Network Africa this week, the spread of the Ebola virus seems to be under control in Nigeria.
As at the present time, the two isolation walls that have been active in Lagos State and Rivers State respectively are empty. We don't have anybody now we are treating actively for Ebola virus disease as at this moment.
But can the same be said for other African countries, particularly Liberia? Then days after the US confirms the former Alshabab leader Ahmed Abdi Godane was killed, retaliatory attacks take place.
This is really more like guerrilla warfare. A guerrilla movement has the advantage of where to hit.
Also on the show, 3 decades after a famine killed more than 1 million people in Ethiopia, the country is playing its part in boosting food security.
The demand is so huge, but the supply is limited because there are no many seed companies who are capable to produce quality seed for maize, wheat, beans, and other cereal crops.
And we look at how a film director tells the story of what happened during the Kenya Westgate Mall attack by using CCTV.
Clearly, I don't experience anything like what the victims experienced, but it's a second-hand relationship to the event. But it does affect you because you're in such intimate contact with the material. You're contemplating it hour after hour after hour during the editing process.
Hello and welcome to Network Africa with me, Cynthia Are. This week, the fight against the spread of the Ebola virus continues, and out of all the affected West African countries, Nigeria is still taking the lead in getting the most results.
If we are looking at total number of survivors in Nigeria from Ebola virus disease known to us, 12. But those that we managed and discharged, 10. Out of the total 19 cases that have so far been confirmed in Nigeria. There is no community transmission of the disease in Nigeria, unlike other countries. But we have taken precautions. What we are doing, we may have said everybody should just be moving about this business, but we are taking just precautions. Because there's no scientific basis for it. There's no community transmission. That separates Nigeria from other countries. There's community transmission in other countries. There's no single case of community transmission yet in Nigeria.
The Minister of Health, Professor Onyebuchi Chukwu. Now, in order to find out more about Nigeria's good luck charm, I sat down with one of our health correspondents, Mary Alaye Yusuf, and I started by asking her about the efforts made by both the federal and the state governments.
Ebola virus disease has no treatment, but what they do is they sustain the person and give the person treatment as needed for symptoms that show up. If there's diarrhea, they rehydrate. If there's pain, they give painkillers. They just ease the person through the process of the Ebola virus disease. Viruses don't have a cure, but they run a course. And if you can sustain the person while the virus is running its course, he can come through.
So we understand what the international community is doing, but since we're in Lagos, let's come back to home right now. What is being done by the Lagos state government? Has it upped its game since efforts we saw when when it initially broke in Lagos upon the arrival of Patrick Sawyer. What's been done by Lagos State government? Because we seem to be doing quite
It's
well.
been very impressive. The Lagos State government, and not only the Lagos State government, there's been a lot of enlightenment campaigns, a lot of teaching, a lot of information going out there. And people have gone as far as getting churches, getting traditional rulers, people who are crowd gatherers, to educate them so that they can, gather in their crowds with more caution. I've even seen in churches and public places, people carrying sanitizers about and using them on anybody who comes in. So there's a lot of enlightenment out there. And I must commend Nigerians. They have been great with their response, and they've been wonderful, really.
Well, since you're commending Nigerians, I'll say thank you since I'm Nigerian, and I will continue to exercise my healthy fear. Thank you so much. I've been speaking with our health affairs correspondent, Mary Alale Yusuf, and she's been telling us about how the situation is being handled right here in Nigeria.
Now, just like Mary said in that interview, there hasn't been so much luck in containing the Ebola virus, particularly in Liberia, where the health minister of the country has likened the spread to a wildfire. Now, just so you get a clearer picture, things are so bad that we understand that new patients are now being turned away because the medical staff finds the situation too challenging to cope with. The World Health Organization has warned that thousands of more cases could occur in Liberia, which has been hit by the worst outbreak so far.
Health workers in Liberia are continuing to assist thousands stranded at centers like these. Numbers of those infected with deadly Ebola virus have continued to grow in the West African country, one of the worst affected in the region. Here in Maghrebe County in north-central Liberia, the World Food Programme has been providing food to holding centers for people suspected of having the disease. To many in this West African country, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf's government has not done enough to protect them from the deadly virus. Ebola has killed more than 1,000 people in Liberia since its arrival 6 months ago. Across West Africa, the death toll from the world's worst Ebola outbreak has surpassed 1,900. WFP is currently scaling up its response to the Ebola virus to provide assistance to more than 1 million people affected by the outbreak in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. So far, more than 140,000 people have received food assistance in the three countries.
They are finding it difficult to get food because they are not allowed to get out. So as a result, we are providing food to them.
Many people say they are struggling to cope. Jerry Peabody is an airport worker and the father of 6 children.
Main worry is how long are we going to be quarantined? And we don't know when they're going to lift the ban on us as we have been quarantined. And for now, I'm thinking how soon, because we need to go back to work. We have been quarantined and we are not working. We don't have means of earning money for ourselves now.
WFP is also concerned about the knock-on effect of the restrictions on movement and trade, farming, harvesting of crops, and the transfer of food from farms to markets. Recent assessments indicate staple food prices are on the rise, but the disease is far outspacing efforts to control it. Medical charity Medicine Sans Frontiers said this week a further 800 Ebola beds were needed in Monrovia alone, and it called for foreign military teams to be deployed. Although the epidemic was detected deep in the forest of neighboring Guinea in March, Liberia now accounts for more than half the 1,900 people who have died from the virus. WFP urgently needs $70 million to continue its response to the Ebola emergency.
And so I had to speak with the Voice of America's Anne Look, who just returned from Liberia. And I started out by asking her if things are as bad as they're being portrayed by the media regarding the situation in Liberia.
It's pretty difficult to see on the ground, or you can see on the ground how outpaced and outmatched the response is by the virus, how much of a lead the virus really has on response efforts, and how hard people are working to try and catch up.
Well, and I also like to ask, why is it spreading so rapidly, especially when we've seen, efforts on the part of the government? For instance, we understand that as at yesterday, they were increasing the number of isolation centers, and now about 10 in number, and they're supposed to accommodate about 500 people. So we see these efforts on the part of the government, but why is it that despite those efforts, the spread seems to be going on exponentially as described in the last report?
Yeah, I mean, Ebola, the virus, it has a head start. Even these treatment units, the World Health Organization said today that Liberia, just in Monrovia, needs 1,000 beds for suspected Ebola cases. So even the 500 that they're trying to get in place now aren't enough, and that's just to deal with the current caseload. Keep in mind, transmission is happening person to person to person. And every time someone is sick and dies in their home and exposes their family members, you've got more cases kind of mushrooming out. I mean, I saw this on the ground myself. I was at a burial of a woman who had tried to go to a treatment center to be isolated. There was no room. She was sent home. She died at home. Her children were exposed. Her children had to be taken into isolation. It's like this never-ending cycle that, even though they are doing good work and they are succeeding in getting hundreds of people out of the community, getting in the treatment units, people are surviving, it's still just monumental, the amount of cases that are out there.
So, and based on the fact that you've had first-hand experience, basically, on what's on the situation in Liberia, what, in your opinion, would you say is the way forward concerning the situation there?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree with what public health experts are saying. More treatment units, more health workers, definitely more health workers. And more of what I did see starting on the ground, things like volunteers going out door to door in communities, trying to look for sick people, trying to follow up on relatives of Ebola patients. Earlier on in the outbreak, we had a lot of talk about denial and people refused to comply with health recommendations. That is fading now. I think people are just scared. They want to know what to do. They want help. They want treatment. And now the question is ramping up quickly to supply treatment to everyone who needs it.
We'll take a break on Network Africa now, but when we come back, days after the U.S. confirms the leader of Alshabab was killed during an airstrike, a new leader is installed and retaliatory attacks take place.